Welcome to Special Session. I'm Bryan Schott with Utah Political Watch, and boy, do we have a lot to get into today. First up, Utah Senator Mike Lee has a habit of posting bad faith nonsense every time the neo-Nazi group Patriot Front marches somewhere in this country, and I'm going to break down exactly why he does it and what it says about just how little respect he actually has for the people who support him. Then, Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson is clapping back at the Trump administration after the DOJ sent her a letter containing threats of criminal prosecution over her decision to follow state law and her refusal to hand over unredacted voter rolls. We'll get into what's actually going on in that lawsuit and why Henderson is right to push back. We'll also talk about the primary election results. They're now finalized 2 weeks after the primary. And we'll talk about a theory from a local news organization that posits Democrat Ben McAdams winning his primary in Congressional District 1 might give lawmakers cold feet on reviving the redistricting fight. Spoiler, I think that takes wrong, and I'll tell you why. Now, before we get into the program, a couple of quick favors to ask. If you like this show, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening right now. And if you've got a minute, leave a rating and a review. It genuinely helps more people find the show. And secondly, this show and everything Utah Political Watch is entirely reader and listener supported. There's no corporations behind me, no billionaires writing checks, no foundation bankrolling this operation. It's just me doing this work full time, and it's made possible by people like you. If you want to help keep it going, head to utahpolitics.news and become a paid subscriber. It's $5 a month or $55 a year. Or if a subscription isn't your thing, you can throw some money in the tip jar instead. Every dollar goes directly towards keeping this independent journalism alive. Okay, let's get into the show. Boy, do we got a lot to talk about. You would think that we're at the part... My hair looks stupid. Can't believe it. Sorry about that, everybody. Been head down doing research all day and didn't realize my hair looked like that. What are you going to do? You would think that it being, the week after the 4th of July, there's not a lot to talk about, but we have got a lot to talk about tonight. What's on my list? Well, Senator Mike Lee thinks you are stupid, and I'm going to explain that one for you. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson claps back at the Trump administration. You got to love the way that she is handling these threats from the Trump administration about voter information, about their attempts to meddle in elections. We'll talk about that. The election results were finalized today. Today's 2 weeks after the election, so the canvass has happened in the primary election, and the November elections are set. There was an article it was one of the local news organizations, and they were talking about whether Ben McAdams winning the primary in the 1st Congressional District would give lawmakers pause about the redistricting fight. And I understand what they were trying to say, but the hypothesis is completely wrong. I'll explain to you why they may not want to get involved in the redistricting fight this year. We can talk about the World Cup. There's no World Cup games tonight. There's none tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. We've had a World Cup game every single day up until this point. Now we're down to the final 8 teams. 6 teams from Europe, 1 team from South America, 1 team from Africa. That's it. Before we get going, what a terrible performance by the U.S. men's team against Belgium. They played scared. I was really kind of embarrassed by that whole thing. I was really sad to see the way that they crashed out of the tournament. They got worked. But you kind of expected that, after Donald Trump put his stink on the whole thing and tried to horn in on it with that phone call to Infantino trying to get the red card for Folarin Balogun suspended. Everything Trump touches dies. He got a stink on it, and then we get worked. And it just made us a laughingstock with the rest of the world. I mean, we are finally getting a little bit of respect from the soccer world, and now that's not going to happen. Nathan Detroit says Trump still gets to present the trophy and probably end up keeping it for himself. He wants to. I think that's absolutely embarrassing that they're going to let Trump hand the trophy out at the after, whoever wins. I'm kind of hoping that the team who wins it, they just push him out of the way. They don't want him there in these pictures for the trophy lift. He did that during the FIFA World Cup when Chelsea won, and he just stood on stage, and you could just see it in their faces. They were all, all the players were like, what the hell is going on? Trump just stand there doing his stupid little dance. It's embarrassing. He should not be there. He's being treated like a Make-A-Wish kid. He should not be there for the trophy presentation. It's kind of embarrassing that they would let him do that. Welcome into the show tonight. My name is Bryan Schott. I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. You can find us online at utahpolitics.news. I'm an independent journalist. I've been covering Utah politics for more than 25 years. And so I've got a wealth of knowledge about things that have happened in the past. And it's kind of my job to help you understand why decisions are being made certain ways, why this has happened in the past, so you can be a more informed voter. And I think that's just the best thing for our democracy, is the more informed voters we have, the better. The great thing about being an independent journalist is there's no corporations telling me what to cover. There's no billionaires writing me checks to make sure that I can do this. My entire operation is funded by my readers, by my viewers, by people who watch the live stream, watch my TikTok videos, watch my Instagram videos, read my stuff online, read my stuff on Facebook. That's how all of this stuff happens. And if you want to help make it happen, the easiest way to do it is go over to my website. That's utahpolitics.news. And you can sign up for my newsletter. That's free. It's very easy to do, and you'll get an email with all of my journalism sent directly to your inbox when I publish a new story. But if you want to make more live streams like this possible, more journalism like I do possible, you can become a paying subscriber, $55 a year, $5 a month. It's like 17 cents a day. You get a few extra things if you do that. And you can also, and if you don't want to be if you don't want a subscription, you can always throw a couple dollars in the tip jar. All of that goes to fund what I do here at Utah Political Watch and makes more stuff like this possible. And to those of you who have already done that, I really appreciate it. Nathan Detroit, who's always in on these live streams, he's one of our subscribers. And I promise, if you make a good joke, I will steal it from you and then write about it on my website. Anyway, Nathan's very funny. He has some very, very good jokes. But a lot of stuff to talk about. Hessler Tail on Instagram wants to talk about the Charlie Kirk stuff in Utah County. Lots of eyes on Utah this week. It's a preliminary hearing for Tyler Robinson, who's accused of killing Charlie Kirk. We're seeing some of the evidence from prosecutors. I have to admit, I'm not paying a super close attention to what's happening down there. I know there are a lot of other outlets that are devoting a lot of resources to it. I'm one person, but the evidence is pretty compelling so far. And this is just to decide whether they can move forward with a trial against him. A lot of attention because of the way that Charlie Kirk was killed in Utah County. That's going on down there. But again, I'm not paying super close attention to it because, court stuff, it's interesting, but, at the end of the day, this is a murder trial. It's not really anything political. It just happened to have happened here in Utah, and that's why there's a lot of attention on this here in the state. And that's pretty much why I'm not paying, I'm not obsessively watching the coverage of what's happening down there. I'm sure that I'll probably pay a little more attention once we get to an actual trial. This is just the preliminary part of it where we're seeing some of the evidence that prosecutors have. Coveted Platypus on TikTok asks a question, and we're going to talk about Mike Lee in a second. So this is a great way to just jump into this. They're saying, not saying this should be you, Bryan, but why don't the local media ever hold Mike Lee accountable? Like him saying the Patriot Front guys were SPLC, that's libel. Because Mike Lee does not talk to the local media unless they are friendly to him. obviously won't talk to me. He will not talk to me after, a couple of years ago when we found out that it was right after those text messages between him and Mark Meadows, who was the White House chief of staff at the time, right after January 6th, when those text messages leaked in 2022. That same day, I drove up to Summit County to the the Summit County Republican Convention because I knew Senator Lee would be there, and you can find the video pretty much on all of my social media. But I attempted to ask him about those text messages. He's still not explained that. And he will not go on any media that does not treat him with kid gloves. He spends all of his time talking to Glenn Beck. He goes on Fox News. Benny Johnson, the guy who was paid by the Russians. He only spends his time in friendly environments. He does not want to get challenged because he doesn't have any excuse. He really doesn't. And he knows what he did. He just doesn't want to get challenged. He wants to live in his own little fiction. But what Coveted Platypus brought up, and this is something that happened over the weekend. If you remember, the Patriot Front bozos, those Nazis, white supremacists, marched in Washington, D.C. If you remember a couple of years ago, they tried to march through a pride parade up in Idaho, and they had trouble with their U-Haul because they drove there in a U-Haul, and there were all sorts of issues, and they got arrested. There were some guys from Salt Lake City who were part of that. Well, these Patriot Front idiots marched in Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July. They walk around and they look like Best Buy employees with their blue shirts and khaki pants, and white face masks, and then their khaki hats. They want to be a paramilitary organization. They are a bunch of white supremacists. They are Nazis. If you see their postings around, they're here in Salt Lake City, they're in a lot of cities, talking about preserving the white race. I mean, they are clearly a far-right wannabe militia group. And they march through Washington, D.C. And I'm going to bring these tweets up here. But our illustrious Senator Mike Lee, he was posting, and he does this every time that they march. Because if you remember, they marched down, I believe it was at the Riverton City Hall last year. But every time that there's a video of these absolute dorks marching, this white nationalist and fascist group, Patriot Front, whenever they're marching, Senator Mike Lee starts talking about how they are feds, or they are actually Democrats, and he thinks he's being funny, but he does this every single time. But the thing you need to understand about why he does this is because Mike Lee thinks you are stupid. That's the only reason why he does this. Mike Lee thinks you are stupid, or he's making this argument for his followers who are, shall we say, politically unsophisticated. That's what it's for. And if you want to make a Venn diagram of Mike Lee's supporters and the people he thinks are stupid and those who are politically unsophisticated, it's basically a circle. They're all the same people. But Mike Lee is making this argument for that group, for people who have zero critical thinking skills, who people he has zero respect for. He thinks he is the smartest person in the room, and he thinks that you are stupid. And he thinks it's funny. It's not funny. But anyway, Mike Lee thinks you're dumb, and that's why he makes these arguments. The tweet I have up right now, he says, "Are these really the most believable fake white supremacist SPLC money can buy?" What he's doing there is he's arguing. Remember, the Trump administration indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center. They brought charges against Southern Poverty Law Center because they're claiming that in their investigations, they paid informants inside these white supremacist groups, which they do. That's what they've done in order to get to infiltrate these groups. And the Trump administration is saying, well, they're actually funding, racism. They're actually creating this. They're claiming it's all fake, and so Mike Lee making a bad faith argument. If you read the legal filings in this case that the Trump administration is bringing against the SPLC, it's completely laughable. But the whole reason why they're doing that is because they want to silence groups like the SPLC, groups who go after hate groups. That's the whole intention of this, and they're making other groups that probably don't have the resources of the SPLC think twice about speaking out against the Trump administration. That's what happens. But that is where that's why he's making these arguments. Because he thinks you are stupid. He thinks you're dumb. He had another tweet here. This is probably the earlier one, where he says, Patriot Front, brought to you by leftists who don't know that patriots don't wear masks. Now, this is apparently something about COVID, because conservatives, right-wingers didn't wear masks during COVID, completely ignoring the fact that it's, the ICE agents are all wearing masks, and they're fighting for their ability to wear masks. This is all just really... it's a stupid argument from a man who thinks he's smarter than you. He thinks he's funny. He's not funny. Mike Lee is the most insufferable dork on the planet, and he thinks that you're dumb, and that's why he's making this argument. He thinks that the people who support him are stupid. That's why he makes these bad faith arguments about the Save America Act, which he does not have the votes to get through the Senate. He doesn't, and he doesn't have the juice to get the votes. He's not convincing people to vote for this voter suppression thing this voter suppression bill. I think he's smarter than this. He thinks he's being smart. He thinks this is a savvy political move. His chief political advisor, Dan Houser, he was the guy who was behind that super PAC that was running all of the Salt Lake Blake ads, the AI-generated ads. Boy, did they love themselves some AI. Mike Lee loves AI-generated slop. That is like the best thing in the world to him. It's really funny to watch him try to talk about pop culture. He expresses a lot of affection for U2, the band U2. But if U2 ever met him, you would think that Bono, even though he's nonviolent, would probably not be a fan of Senator Mike Lee. Hold on just a second, folks. I want to introduce you to someone. We have a new friend in the house. This is Daisy. We got Daisy from Dirt Roads Rescue. No, Rescue Rovers. Got her. And she is just a sweetheart. But this is Daisy. She is our new friend in the house, and she is just an absolute sweetheart. So say hello to everybody. Say hello to everyone, Daisy. This is Daisy. She's our new friend. Came to us a couple weeks ago, and she's just been a delight. Haven't had a pup in the house for a long time. So we're learning that over. And we're also learning that being a puppy is, dealing with a puppy is a young person's game. I'll put it that way. She's probably about 4 or 5 months old, very young. We think she's a healer mix of some sort, but she is just a sweetheart. So anyway, that is Daisy, and just wanted everyone to meet her. So back to Senator Mike Lee. The reason he posts this stupid stuff is because he thinks you're dumb. That's the only reason why he does it. He thinks you're dumb, and he has zero respect for his supporters. They keep giving him money. He thinks you're dumb and he thinks it's funny. Gabriel on YouTube says, did we get any surprises in the final vote counts, or did Representative Lee still lose as bad as he did on election night? Yes, Representative Trevor Lee did lose as bad as he did on election night. That's because we had a change in the law. Change in the law is those election totals. Most of the ballots have to be in to the actually all the ballots have to be into the election officials by the close of the polls. They can't arrive in the mail afterwards. So pretty much what you see on election night are the numbers that we are going to get. Let me pull up Davis County just to see what the final tally there was in District 16. Yeah, Bob Stevenson ended up with just over 65% of the vote. Trevor Lee just under 35%. So, almost 2-to-1 margin there. It was a pretty. It was a thumping, and Representative Lee, everyone I was talking to said he knew that he was in trouble, and you could tell the way he was acting. He was panicking towards the end. And now he's trying to brush it off, although he is still acting out on social media and not handling his loss very well. And I'm kind of enjoying trolling him a little bit because he has been, he's very childish. He loves to dish it out, but he cannot take it. And to me, that just puts a big old target on your back. When Wendemus on YouTube says, Blake Moore and Celeste Malloy also think we're dumb, so did Stuart Adams. I wish that meant Peter Crosby could win. Let's talk a little bit about Stuart Adams. I've been having a lot of thoughts about this. And one of the things that I talked about in the live last week was Stuart Adams. Clearly, it was the whole Stratos data center that did him in. And it was the process surrounding the Stratos data center. If they had waited until after the primary election, I think he probably would have eked it out. In that 3-person race, I think there probably would have been enough support for him. But the problem is, this is another person who probably knowing him, knowing the way that he operates, having dealt with him for years, he thinks he is the smartest person in the room. He does not like to hear dissenting voices. He does not like any sort of dissent. He does not like any sort of pushback. And so he saw this as a positive, and that's why he and the MITA board, pushed this thing through and then forced the Box Elder County Commission, basically rammed it down their throat. And what happened? Well, Adams lost his primary, lost it big time. I mean, he got crushed. And the 2 Box Elder County commissioners who were up for election in the primary, they lost their races. And the thing is, this data center issue, I would suspect that it's got some Republicans spooked, because this is the first tangible evidence that we've had that voters are pissed. Voters are PO'd. And I think that's why they are spooked. And so I was having this conversation today, and we were talking about Prop 4. If you remember, that's the anti-gerrymandering ballot initiative. And legislators they were, especially Stuart Adams, they were really hot to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot this November that would give the legislature the authority to repeal a citizen-passed ballot initiative. That's why they got in trouble in the first place. In 2024, the Utah Supreme Court ruled that the legislature did not have the authority to just completely repeal a ballot initiative passed by the voters. They overstepped their constitutional authority. They can change it, but it has to be a narrowly tailored change, and it has to meet a compelling government interest. And just repealing the entirety of Prop 4 did neither of those. And so that's why they tried to get Amendment D on the ballot in 2024. And the reason it was kicked off the ballot is because they didn't meet the noticing or the notice requirements, in which it has to be published in a newspaper in each county in the state 60 days before the election. And that we've still got time for them to try and do it. But I wonder if they're going to, because voters are not happy with them right now. I don't think voters trust the legislature. And I think that there is enough of a throw the bums out mentality. Not across the board. But if you're in an environment where voters are pissed off at you, voters are mad, do you really want to put something like that on the ballot? And they don't have to do it this year, because the next time that they're going to be doing redistricting is 2031. So they could wait to put it on the ballot in 2028. They could put it on the ballot in 2030. They could actually put it on the ballot in an off year if they pass a constitutional amendment, and then they get the governor to say, yeah, let's go ahead and put it in there. So they could do it in 2027 or 2029. They have a lot of time to try and put that constitutional amendment on the ballot. So I wonder if they're going to try and do it this year. I think that there are probably some people who they've got some, they're really, really hesitant to do that because they got a tangible notice that voters are not happy with them. Voters are mad. We saw it with Stuart Adams losing his race. And there are a number of reasons, but I think the data center is probably the biggest one. And the thing about the data center is it is tangible. It is a thing. People can see it, right? They know what these facilities do. And when people were talking about the size of the campus and the amount of pollution it would probably put out and the amount of heat it would generate and the amount of resources it used, people could visualize this, and they didn't like it. And they wanted to punish someone, because the process to get this approved was done behind closed doors, done in the way that Stuart Adams likes to operate. He has been basically the most powerful politician in the state for a number of years, runs roughshod over the top of Governor Cox, who has, just basically has been cowed by him. Cox does whatever he wants, not anymore. I think that the fireworks ban, as I said before, I don't think it was a coincidence that Governor Spencer Cox, decided to institute a statewide fireworks ban until after Stuart Adams lost his primary. I think that's what got him to show some backbone there, because it was the right thing to do. And, we've had more fires started because of fireworks. There were some more fires because of that. And now we've got another 100,000 acre fire burning in Utah. It's a really, really bad, really, really bad fire season. And I think that might put Representative Matt McPherson, he's kind of in a swingy district anyway, but if you remember, he was arguing that, my freedom, and the fact that he owns some fireworks stands, and that would put a dent in his, in his income. That could be a problem. So I don't know. If I were advising the Republican majority up on the Hill, I would say you might want to wait until 2028. You might want to wait, because voters, they ain't too happy with the legislature right now. They ain't too happy. I did see a question in the chat. Someone asked, do they think that Stuart Adams is going to lose his seat on MIDA? I don't know. He's been there since 2008. He was appointed by Governor Huntsman, who first appointed him. So he's been there, 18 years. That's probably long enough. Jerry Stevenson, who's leaving the legislature, he's still on the MIDA board. They just hired as the executive director Dan Hemmert, a former legislator who became the director of, I think, GOEO when Spencer Cox was first elected. He left his seat in the legislature. It would be great. I think being on this board, this pretty much unaccountable, unelected board for 18 years, that, there's an argument to be made that it is too long. But I don't have any particular insight. I don't know if he keeps his seat or not. SJ on TikTok asks, what do you think he'll do now that he lost his job? Well, he's wildly wealthy. He owns so much land. He owns a lot of land. He's a real estate developer. He does have his company. So, he certainly has got his job. He just doesn't. The one thing he does, when he didn't have to really run for office, because he was just a shoe-in. This, as I said, this is the first time he's ever really had to compete for the seat. What he would do is he would just travel all over the place using campaign funds, which you can here in Utah. If you go back and look at his disclosures, there were years that he spent more. There were years when he was on the ballot where he spent more on travel than he did on his actual campaign. He had to spend so much money on his campaign this year, and it didn't work for him. When Windema says he's going to keep pulling strings just without oversight, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, he's still a very, very influential person. He can't quite become he's not supposed to become a lobbyist right away. There is a cooling off period, but Senator Kurt Bramble found the loophole on that, where if he's lobbying for his company, he can do that. So he might be able to do that. I don't know. And Wendemus on YouTube asks, is anyone out there trying to repeal the power to create MIDA and improvement districts with initiative maybe? I'm hopeful about Carol Smackman Moss's new organization. I don't know what's going to happen to MIDA, because when Stuart Adams was there, everyone knew that you did not mess with MIDA. That was his baby. You didn't do anything to try and rein it in. That was his thing. But now he's not in charge anymore. So maybe they'll do something superficial that will look like, some sort of regulation. Make it look like they're trying to rein it in. The problem is they've gone so far beyond what they were initially intended to do. They're, building creating the Falcon Hill part right outside of Hill Air Force Base makes sense. Moving Fort Douglas makes sense. Building a luxury hotel at Deer Valley, I don't know how that's a benefit to the military, but they use the power of the state to issue bonds. Taxpayers aren't on the hook for those bonds. I mean, the bonds that they issue to pay for this infrastructure, taxpayers aren't on the hook for that. It's paid for out of the taxes that they collect in the special districts. But still, they're able to get around a lot of the regulation stuff in order to get these things approved. But it's really hard to argue that building a luxury hotel, building luxury condominiums at Deer Valley is a military benefit. It's really hard to do that. Utah Grit says, I believe there are other organizations that were created, Inland Port, for example, with similar limited restriction powers. Yeah, that's one of the things that they like to do. The legislature loves to do that, love to create these bodies. The joke is, they believe in local control until the locals need controlling, and then they step in. Joey Bag of Donuts on TikTok asks, are there any ethics accountability in the legislature? They do have an ethics committee, and there's an ethics commission here in the state. The problem is they've made it so that nobody really knows if anybody is under investigation by the ethics committee, because especially on the legislative ethics committee, they are not allowed to talk about any complaints made to them. Those are in the rules. They are not allowed to talk about that. They are not allowed to acknowledge that there's been an ethics complaint filed. They do whatever they can to keep these things away from the public. And that all came after Greg Hughes got in some ethical trouble when his dealings with the Utah Transit Authority. If you remember, they were taking all these wild trips around the world with the UTA, and people filed some ethics reports on him, and I believe there was an investigation. Nothing really came of it, but then after that they revamped the ethics rules, and now the ethics committee, someone can file an ethics complaint, but it's really hard. I'll have to look up the rules for you, but it's really hard to get an ethics complaint heard. It's really hard to substantiate it, and it can't be disclosed to the public. So yeah, I mean, ethics in the legislature, good luck. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about what happened today. Well, one more bit from this discussion on Stuart Adams. I wanted to get to it a little bit later, but there was an article in the Tribune today by Robert Gerke. He was looking into what happens with the Utah Senate after Stuart Adams leaves. Are things going to change? Or are they not? It was a pretty great quote in there from former Senator Daniel Thatcher, who he clashed with Adams a lot. Like they really butted heads throughout his tenure in the Utah Senate. And he said that he left the legislature. One of the reasons he left, I mean, he had some health problems, but one of the reasons he left is because of the heavy-handed way that Adams handled things. His quote was, "He unilaterally overrode the caucus on a regular basis. He treated anyone who disagreed with him, no matter how respectfully, with absolute utter contempt and cruelty. He conducted business in the dark like he was growing mushrooms." That's a pretty good description of how Stuart Adams handled his time in the Senate. That's a pretty good description of how he ran things. And it frustrated a lot of people. Everything that I know about how Stuart Adams operated in the Senate, everything I know about it, that quote rings 100% true. And just look at what happened when they switched leadership. In 2024, Evan Vickers was elected the majority leader. Don Ipson was the majority whip, and Milner was the assistant majority whip. And what happened was, when the whole fight, rewind, that was not in 2024, that was in 2022. 2022 is when they were elected. So they were in those positions during the 2023 session, during the 2024 session, all the way up until the 2024 election. And what I've heard from several people, very reputable sources, is that in public, Vickers, Milner, Ipson, they were loyal soldiers to Adams, especially around the Amendment D thing, which, the constitutional amendment that will allow them to overturn or repeal any citizen initiative. They were very loyal soldiers. But behind closed doors, away from the public, because the Senate does all their business in closed caucus. They have closed caucus. Republicans get together and meet. You're not supposed to talk about what happens in the caucus at all. Few people have talked to me about what happens in the caucus, but you're not supposed to. What happened behind closed doors, they pushed back against Adams. They said, maybe this is probably not the best idea. Maybe we need to think about this a little bit. Maybe we need to, think a little bit more about whether we want to do this. And that upset Adams. And so what happened was, there was essentially a leadership coup after the 2024 election. Vickers was out as majority leader. Ipson was out as majority whip. Milner was out as assistant majority whip. And in comes Cullimore as majority leader, Mike McKell as majority whip. That was, from what I understand, that was all engineered by Adams because he was upset with the disloyalty of Vickers and Milner and Ipson. And that all happened right around the time that Ipson's wife was ill. People who have talked to me about this have described it as a coup engineered by Adams. Because that's what he does. He with a complete heavy hand. And part of the problem is, if you look, they have there's the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. The Republican Senate Campaign Committee. It's their PAC, which they give money to senators for their reelection. That was all centralized under Adams. That was sort of his idea. So instead of lobbyists donating to individual lawmakers, they donate to that PAC, and then Adams gets to decide who gets money. That's makes sense. That's how you control everyone. But that's where this all came from. Let's talk a little bit what happened today with Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson. She posted this on Threads, and kudos to her for posting it on Threads and not on X. And the Nazis on X get really upset when she doesn't post on X. But she says, got another love letter this morning from the DOJ, sprinkled throughout with threats of criminal prosecution. I'm sure I'm not the only chief election officer of a state who is being targeted for following state and federal laws by resisting DOJ's demands for private voter data that have thus far been ruled illegal by at least a dozen courts. This is truly bizarre behavior by the federal agency that is supposed to be protecting civil rights. And this is all part of the Trump administration's attempts to meddle in elections. The Constitution is clear. Elections are handled by the states. Democracy Docket, that is Mark Elias's publication, great publication. They got a hold of one of these letters. They said that they sent letters. Actually, it was all of the top election officials in all 50 states and D.C., warning that they could face criminal prosecution over possible non-citizen voting, which doesn't happen, escalating the administration's pressure campaign against state election officials after courts repeatedly rejected its effort to seize unredacted voter rolls. If you remember, we are in court right now. The state is in court. They're being sued. They're being sued by the Justice Department to try to get unredacted voter rolls. And Lieutenant Governor Henderson is following state law, saying, here's what you can have. You can have the public portion of our rolls, but you cannot have the unredacted portion, which makes sense, right? She's following the law. And the Department of Justice took her to court, and now they are threatening criminal prosecution if they don't comply. Now, the letters were sent by Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon. She leads the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Weird. The DOJ has claimed that the Voting Rights Act allows them to get copies of this. No, it doesn't. They're completely reading this. They're reading this wrong. But the letters demand that states explain within 5 days how they plan to comply with federal voter eligibility laws. Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, a Democrat, said his office received a letter and rejected DOJ's suggestion that Arizona election officials are failing to properly maintain the state's voter rolls. His quote was, "It is insulting to insinuate that the good people at our county recorder's offices across the state are not doing their jobs correctly. Arizona election officials have always worked to ensure that only eligible citizens are registered to vote, and we will continue following Arizona law, not directions that come from political rhetoric or intimidation." According to Democracy Docket, the letters frame routine voter list maintenance as a potential criminal matter, warning that election officials could be prosecuted if they knowingly retain non-citizens on the rolls or allow them to receive and cast ballots. If you remember, Utah did a comprehensive audit of the voter rolls, and they found, a handful? I think it was maybe one non-citizen who had registered but had never cast a ballot that had slipped through. This doesn't happen. Non-citizens do not vote in American elections. I think even the Heritage Foundation, the far-right Heritage Foundation, has been tracking this, and they found maybe a couple hundred suspected cases of voter fraud over the past couple of decades. It's so rare, it just does not happen. Lieutenant Governor Henderson is doing heroic duty, and I applaud her for the way that she is handling these ridiculous requests from the Trump administration. There's no legal authority, there's no constitutional authority for them to create these, to ask for the unredacted voter rolls. There's no constitutional authority. There's no legislative authority. It does not exist. Elections are up to the states. The states are the ones who are in charge of it. The states are the ones who handle this. And, she seems to relish pushing back against the Trump administration on this. Can you imagine what it would be like if we had Aaron Davidson as lieutenant governor? Or you go back and think about, was it Natalie Clausen, who was running with Phil Lyman in 2024 on his ticket? Could you imagine if she was a lieutenant governor? What a mess our elections would be. I mean, Man. Man, oh man. Kiki and the Cat says, with her choices, she's talking about Henderson, I feel like she's moving the pieces in place to run for governor in 2028. I've told you she will be a front runner for governor simply because of her name ID. But I think if she can get on the ballot, if she can get through a Republican primary, I don't know if she can get through a Republican primary. And maybe she runs as an independent. I don't know. But she's got a lot of goodwill pushing back against this obvious manipulation, these ridiculous justifications, these ridiculous attempts to put the thumb on the electoral scale by the Trump administration. People are noticing what she's doing. She is meeting this head on. And you have to applaud that, because courage is in such short supply, especially politically these days. Anybody who shows some courage, you have to encourage them. You have to do it. So I applaud what she's doing. I think that, if she decides to run for governor, she's going to have a really tough time ahead of her. She would not get through a Republican convention. I think John Curtis is clearly the front runner if he decides to get in, and I'm pretty sure he's going to get in because it's a free run for him. Although that 250-mile walk he did for the 250th anniversary kind of petered out. Everyone was interested at the beginning, but there wasn't a lot of coverage of that afterwards. But I think that Curtis is probably the prohibitive favorite. I think Jason Chaffetz, if he decides to run, and I think he's going to run as well, I think that he is in a good position, or going to be a front runner, because it's all going to be based on name ID. That's the biggest thing that people don't seem to understand. You either have name ID or you spend the money to get name ID. John Curtis has name ID. The moment he got in that race for U.S. Senate in 2024, it was over. That's why Brad Wilson worked so hard to try to keep him out of that race. They did everything they could to keep him from getting in that race. Because they knew the moment he got in, it was done. It was over with. Because he was going to win. Because he had the biggest name ID. Wilson could have spent the money to get name ID, but he didn't. He spent $6 million of his own money on that race to finish third in the Republican primary. It did get him CEO of the Olympics, so maybe that was money well spent. Jason Chaffetz has name ID. He's on Fox News. He's got best-selling books. He's got a very popular podcast. So among Republicans, people, know who he is. Henderson has name ID. The one person who I think really had their gubernatorial aspirations took a hit during this election cycle is Mike Schultz. Mike Schultz, he's gearing up to run for governor, or at least that's what it looks like. And everyone I talked to said, yeah, he was going to run for governor, and he's going to run for governor in 2028. The problem is nobody knows who he is. It's the same problem Brad Wilson had. Yeah, sure, he's Speaker of the House, but nobody knows who he is. Now, Schultz has a lot more money than Wilson does. Schultz has a private jet that he owns with Kevin Garn. That's the kind of money that Schultz has. He likes to pretend he's a rancher, but he's a very wealthy man. But is he willing to spend that? He's probably worth 50 million, 100 million, somewhere in there. Is he willing to spend the kind of money it's going to take? Because these slick videos where he's talking directly to camera, talking about, whatever policy position. By the way, you're paying for those as a taxpayer. You're paying $6,000 a month for those things, as I've reported. But is he willing to spend that kind of money to be on that? Because those videos ain't doing it for him. They're not. Nobody watches them. He's going to have to do like a sustained advertising blitz. And that may not even be enough to help him. You remember back in 2004 when Leavitt was not going to run for another term. And this was the primary that John Huntsman was in. Leading up to that primary, for almost 2 years, Fred Lampropoulos of Merit Medical, he had ads on KSL that he ran in Morning Drive radio back in 2002, 2003, 2004. That was pretty expensive. Those were expensive spots. He had them in Morning Drive, Afternoon Drive. And they were like commentary about something in the state. And he ran those things constantly. And that was all to build name ID because he was going to run for governor. It didn't work because the moment John Huntsman got in that race, it was over with. I remember distinctly, I was working for KSL Radio at the time, and and I had never met John Huntsman, never met him at all. I was working for KSL Radio at the time. We got a news alert or news release that he was going to be filing to run for governor. So I trekked down to the elections office. This is when it was in the basement of the Capitol, right off of the north entrance. Went down there to file, and it was the first time that I ever met him. We had a nice conversation. Jason Chaffetz was actually running his campaign at the time. But I remember this distinctly. I came back from that assignment, went to my editor, and I said, "That's your next governor." And they said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, he's charismatic. He's well-spoken. He's charming. People are going to gravitate to that." And I was right, because I'm always right. Because I'm always right. And that's why you're watching tonight. But, Schultz, he's going to have to spend a lot of money to get his name ID out there. And that might not even work, because I don't know if he has the kind of charisma. I don't know if he has the kind of charisma to win over an entire state. I mean, frankly, they just have to win the Republican nomination. But I'm sure his heart dropped into his butt the moment he heard John Curtis was thinking about running, because that is the one thing that would just end his gubernatorial ambitions immediately. So anyway, but yeah, I do think that Deidre Henderson, I applaud her for pushing back against the Trump administration on this. I think it's the right thing to do. It's clearly a bad faith effort by the Trump administration to try and put their thumb on the scale. What they want to do is they want to purge voter rolls. Get rid of people who they think shouldn't be on the voter rolls. Make it harder for people to vote. Get them off the voter rolls so they're not registered. It's all part of an effort to put their thumb on the scales ahead of the 2026 midterms. And you only do that if you're scared, if you're worried that you're not going to win. Someone said, Utah Grit on YouTube says, "I'm also a fan of our auditor, Tina Cannon." I will give her some props as well, but I do kind of have to chide her because she went on that stupid God and Country podcast with Uriah Kennedy. That guy is such a clown. If you want to laugh, go on this. So it's a podcast called God and Country, and they usually get right-wing chuds. I mean, it's like a version of John Johnson's terrible podcast if that podcast had head trauma. That's really the only way that I can describe it. It's conspiracy laden. I've told you about Uriah Kennedy in the past. He's been in jail. He was sent to jail because he defrauded for bank fraud. He's been sued for millions of dollars for all sorts of fraud. And now all of a sudden he's become a right-wing podcaster. And I don't know if his co-host is his wife. But he's a real piece of work. And I had to laugh. At the Davis County GOP convention. He's walking around. He's got this big cowboy hat on, big white cowboy hat on, because that's his costume apparently. But he's got this homemade press pass, right? Because he wants to pretend that he's in the media. He's got this homemade press pass, and it's probably roughly the size of a hubcap. It's laminated. It says press. It's got his God and Country podcast logo on it. So he's pretending to be in the media, but at the same time, he's also wanting to be a Republican delegate. Media can't do that. That's not what a legitimate member of the media does. But I just had to laugh because I'd heard stories that during caucus night this year, he was a big supporter of Trevor Lee's. But during caucus night this year, he showed up at one of Trevor Lee's caucus meetings, one of the caucus meetings in Trevor Lee's House district, HD 16, and was demanding to be made a delegate, demanding to be elected a delegate. He doesn't even live in HD 16. That didn't matter. He demanded to be a delegate. Obviously didn't get elected to be one. And then at the Davis County Convention, he was trying to become an alternate to the state convention or whatever. But I mean, just clownish. And if you look at the podcast, it's all right-wing fever swamp stuff. It's just, I'll give him this. It's kind of engaging, and the production value is good. I mean, he's clearly got money to spend on it. Money that he, I mean, what he got sued for charging one of the lawsuits during the COVID pandemic. He formed some company that sold $1 million worth of gloves, the PPE, to a medical company, a hospital company in Minnesota, but never delivered. And in the lawsuit, in the court filings, when he got sued, and he lost a default judgment. It was like $1 million or something. But in the court filings, they said that, right after he got that payment, he started spending it on helicopters and RVs. And, so he's clearly got a lot of money to spend on the production value of this podcast. Multiple cameras. There's a studio, Meanwhile, I'm here just trying to do actual reporting and journalism, and bootstrapping the whole thing myself. I guess if I decided to become a right-wing grifter, I could make a whole bunch of money, but I have way too much integrity to do that because I believe in the truth. And doing real journalism means far too much to me. So anyway. Gabriel asks, with Curtis assumed to run for governor, who would be his LG? I have no idea. I know his chief of staff, Corey Norman, really wanted to run for Congress, but then the maps changed. He wanted to run in Burgess Owens' district, and they were hoping the Burgess Owens would step down no matter what the maps looked like. We learned that wasn't the case. He wanted to run again, but once the maps changed, he was odd man out. So I don't know who his running mate would be. I mean, maybe you get a deal. Who knows? I mean, Herbert, if you remember, Gary Herbert was actually running for governor in 2024, but then he decided to jump onto Huntsman's ticket and suspend his campaign. So maybe that sort of thing happens. I doubt that Deidre Henderson would want to be lieutenant governor again for another term or two. But I think a lot of people could get behind a Curtis Henderson ticket. Or a Henderson Curtis ticket. I think that's the way that she would prefer it. I don't think that she would do that. When Wendema says, with Deidre as his biggest contender, he'll have to find a woman. Winder Newton is still viable. If he were smart, he'd get a moderate like Marsha Judkins. Tammy Tran is making moves. That's the reason why when John Huntsman ran for governor again, he picked Michelle Kafusi out of Provo. She was the mayor of Provo at the time. That's why he did that, because Cox had picked Deidre Henderson as his running mate. So I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. I don't know. Wendema says, I love your actual reporting. You don't need a dumb hat. Oh, I've got plenty of dumb hats. In fact, where is mine? Yeah, hold on a second. I got to tell you this story. Speaking of dumb hats. So if you know anything about me, anything at all, you know that I love Monty Python. And Holy Grail is one of my favorite things. So I actually have this Tim the Enchanter hat that I purchased. And funny story, the day that it arrived in the mail, I had it on. God, I love this hat. I had it on. And I came out of my office, and my wife was working in her at her desk. And I came out with it, and she looked at this and she said, "What is that?" And I replied, "This is a Tim the Enchanter helmet from Monty Python and the Holy Grail." And she replied, "Okay, I know what it is. Why is it in my house?" So not exactly her favorite thing. I love this hat. When they did the anniversary showing of Holy Grail in the theaters, I had a whole outfit. I dressed up as Tim the Enchanter. That is my favorite character from that entire film. So anyway, just had to share. But yeah, so I have stupid hats. I just don't try to make them a part of my reporting. I don't know if you can see it. You can see it over here on the on the landscape feed on YouTube and on Facebook. But that right there is my Magneto helmet that I bought. Again, not my wife's favorite thing, but she still puts up with some of my juvenile behavior. Kiki and the Cat says they know Utah's moving towards becoming a swing state. That probably won't happen if that does happen, it won't happen anytime in the next 10 years. Utah's not going to be a swing state in 10 years. It's still going to be a majority Republican state. I did have a conversation with BYU professor Jacob Rue, and he posts some pretty great things online, and he's talking about some of the demographic changes, some of the religious changes. And I'll be dropping that as a podcast either tomorrow or Thursday. We had a good conversation today about that. So stay tuned for that, but I'm sure that you're going to want to see that. Your Green Griffin 4, I hope I'm saying that correctly, on TikTok says that podcast was worth watching because Tina Cannon gave inside scoop on how vindictive Adams is. That was probably the most useful episode that they've ever done. Most of the time it's just most of the time it's just right-wing fever swamp stuff. It's really, really bad. Bmida19 on TikTok says, I've read that Utah will be Democrat by 2040. I don't know. The demographics of the state are clearly changing, but demographics are not destiny, It's still going to take a lot of work by whichever political party to try and attract younger voters. I mean, Republicans have tried to do that. The problem is they're going out and getting neo-Nazis like Kai Schwemmer, and they think that that's outreach to the youth. Doesn't quite work. That's their idea of outreach to the youth. So let's talk a little bit about, there was a story on KUER. We talked a little bit about this, where they said the headline was, McAdams' win could give Utah lawmakers pause on reviving the redistricting fight. And they're not worried that McAdams won the primary, and they're not going to slow down. Like I've said before, I fully expect them to try and redraw the maps before the 2028 election. Redraw those congressional maps, and I think they've got a good argument. That map was put in place by a judge. It was drawn by the plaintiffs in the case. The only reason that map is there is because lawmakers tried to use a map that was illegal. It did not meet the requirements of Prop 4. And the judge had to pick something. This was a delay tactic by the legislature. What they did was they gave this map. Partisan data was used. Their expert admitted on the stand in the court hearing that he used partisan data. He used Dave's redistricting and partisan data to draw the map that they put forward, and that is not allowed under the tenets of Prop 4. And so the judge, we had to have some sort of map. And the legislature was like, well, give us another chance to draw a map. Well, there wasn't time. There wasn't time to draw a map. The lieutenant governor's office needed that map, needed the map. They had a deadline for the map. And so there just wasn't time. And so the judge had to put something in place. It's happened elsewhere where maps have been put in place so they would have a map. But I think the legislature has a good argument saying that the map that's in place right now wasn't drawn by us. It was put in place by a judge. They like to say that the judge drew it, but the judge didn't draw it. It was drawn by the plaintiffs in the case. But, it's easier to make the argument that the judge drew it because they think that gets people mad. But I do think that they're going to try to redraw the maps. I'm almost convinced, or at least I would say there are better odds than not that the map that's in place right now for this election is not the map that we're going to have for 2028. But the problem is if they follow the rules of Prop 4, it's going to be very hard for them to draw a map that's gerrymandered and guarantees 4 Republican seats. If you remember, one of the maps that they had, the one that they were trying to put forward at first, it created what was essentially 2 swing districts. It split Salt Lake County in 2, and it created 2 swing districts. And I spoke to so many people who work on elections here in the state, and they said the legislature better be thanking their lucky stars that that's not the map that they were going to use. Because if that map were in place, rather than this one, there would be 2 competitive districts for Democrats. And given the electoral environment that we're heading into, where Democrats are ahead on the generic ballot, D+11 right now in the latest one that I saw. I mean, that it's really a favorable environment for Democrats. If that map was in place rather than the one that we have right now, I think that there's a possibility that we would get two Democrats in Congress from Utah, not just one. So they better be thanking their lucky stars. But it's really hard to try and create 4 majority Republican districts if they have to follow the rules of Prop 4, which is the reason why Prop 4 exists. But I expect that what they're going to do is they're going to try and redraw this map. But I don't think that that's going to stop them. But I don't think that Ben McAdams winning a majority in his primary and winning a seat in Congress is going to force them to back off. We talked about it earlier. I think that that if anything stops them, it's that they're going to be wary of giving pissed off voters another reason to get to the polls in November. I think that that's probably the thing that would stop them from doing that. The problem is their argument in this whole Prop 4 thing, claiming that the legislature has the constitutional authority to draw maps. That's a weird argument. It's a correct argument. The Utah Constitution gives the legislature the authority to draw maps. But when you're making that argument, people's eyes glaze over. And the people who really believe that argument are a bunch of weirdos, right? I mean, a bunch of weirdos. The people who love to talk about the Constitution allows this and the proper role of government, they're a bunch of weirdos. I've talked about her before, Jen Brown of that far-right group, Utah Citizens for the Constitution. She likes to pretend she's a constitutional expert. She's not. She's a dentist, and she is a weirdo. Like, she is a weirdo. And I just, those are the people who are trying to advance this argument. So when you're talking to normal voters and you're trying to say, we must honor the Utah Constitution, blah, 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 and the other argument is, hey, you passed a law, you passed an initiative that creates fair maps. That's an easy argument to make. The hard argument is, well, the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. Weirdos. Weirdos make that argument, and people's eyes glaze over. And it's so much easier to make the counter argument that it's fair maps, and people like fair maps. They really do. I don't think that Republicans have a problem. Even the polling that I've seen is about 55% of Utah Republicans like Prop 4 because they don't like politicians choosing their voters. They don't like that. It's a weird argument. They're a bunch of weirdos, and I think that they don't want pissed off voters. Kick Noontz on Instagram says, what's going on with the DOJ notice to Lieutenant Governor Henderson? Are all states receiving these warnings? We talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. And yes, all 50 states in D.C., they got this letter from the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, from Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, who's in charge of the Civil Rights Division. And she sent this letter threatening criminal prosecution if states have undocumented citizens, undocumented voters on their rolls. It's a thing that doesn't happen, but it's part of this Trump administration. And Governor Henderson rightly pushed back against that. I'll bring that up here again in case people didn't see it. This was her response. Got another love letter this morning from the DOJ sprinkled throughout with threats of criminal prosecution. I'm sure I'm not the only chief election officer of a state who's being targeted for following state and federal laws by resisting DOJ's demands for private voter data that have thus far been ruled illegal by at least half a dozen courts. This is truly bizarre behavior by the federal agency that is supposed to be protecting civil rights. Good on you, Lieutenant Governor Henderson. That is the correct response. Because, as I said, this is the Trump administration trying to put their thumb on the scale, voter intimidation, trying to interfere with elections when the Constitution specifically gives the states the authority to run their own elections. The federal government has no authority to do that. Katie Did It asks, could Utah's Attorney General side with the Trump's DOJ and force Henderson to turn over the rolls? What is the opinion of UT's GOP concerning the voter rolls? I did see that some members of the Republican Party Central Committee. And you have to understand that that's the governing body of the Utah Republican Party. It's not, Rob Axon is the chairman, but he doesn't run the party. It's the state central committee. They've got like 140, 160 some odd members on that. And they want to censure Lieutenant Governor Henderson for pushing back against the Trump administration. The problem is the person who wants to run this resolution censuring her is Sophie Anderson, who was running Phil Lyman's campaign, and she is one of the, she's a kook. She is an absolute kook. She is an election conspiracy theorist. And, they're still having trouble coming to grips with the fact that Phil Lyman got destroyed in that primary election. Like, it wasn't even close. I think he won maybe one county. I'll have to go through those numbers, but yeah. I think the AG could, but the AG really doesn't have any authority to make the lieutenant governor comply with the federal government. That's not his role. And knowing how Derek Brown operates, he's close to the Trump administration, but I don't think that he would force Deidre Henderson to try to do something that she doesn't want to do. And he understands the law. Utah law is what governs elections here in the state. The federal government has no role in elections. The reason why Mike Lee wants to pass his Save America Act is to let the federal government interfere with elections. That's what he wants to do. And he's admitted the reason why is because they're worried that they're going to lose the midterms and they have to put their thumb on the scale. So I don't know if I doubt the Attorney General would do something like that. Gabriel on YouTube asks, I wonder how easy it would be to make a drinking game out of all the podcast slop that legislators create / participate in. It's only a few of them. You've got, and I made my thoughts about this clear. You've got the Channel 2 podcast with Heidi Hatch, and her co-hosts on that are Mike Schultz and Mara Carabello, sitting lawmaker and a lobbyist. Wildly inappropriate, not a legitimate news product. You've got inside Utah politics, their election analysts are lobbyists, not a legitimate news product. I like their reporting, but you've got lobbyists who are acting as political commentators. You've got the Hinckley Report, Jason Perry, lobbyist, guests, other lobbyists, and some reporters and lawmakers. Not a legitimate news product. They like to pretend that they're a legitimate news product, but it's not a legitimate news product. So take it with a grain of salt if you listen to those things. I've had a lot of people say, why don't you get a co-host? I would love to find a co-host to do a podcast with. I think I could do a pretty kick-ass podcast if I found a co-host. The problem is the people around here who have thoughts about politics, who I would like to partner with, either want to run for something in the future, or they are lobbyists right now. And the problem with that is they're going to be very guarded in what they can say, and they really can't be honest. And I would not feel good doing a show like that. I was actually speaking with someone who has some pretty big political ambitions. I think they would be a tremendous co-host of a podcast with me. I would love to do a podcast with them. I pitched them on the idea. The problem is they don't know if they want to run for office in the future, and if they do, they would have to be careful in what they say. And that would really, I think that would cheapen the product. I think that would cheapen the product. The thing that makes podcasts good is opinion. There's reporting, and then there's analysis of that. And analysis frequently gets into opinion. There's times when I give my opinion on this show, and I don't have a problem with that. I think that's where journalism is going right now. I think that you do have, I don't think it's improper for journalists to give their opinions. I think it is improper for politicians and lobbyists to pretend that they're journalists. I think that's where it's improper. Kick Noons on Instagram asks, any spin from the Utah Capitol about how great the Utah booth was at the America 250 in D.C.? I really haven't heard anything. I just know that was so sad. And I spoke about this before, but I'm really sad because we were robbed of what could have been a really great celebration of this country's 250th anniversary. There was a group that had been planning it for years. They had funds in place. And at the last second, the Trump administration decided to jump in and make it about them. And you saw what happened. It was pathetic. It was awful. Nobody went. It looked like, look, I grew up in a small town in northeastern Colorado. Every year we had the Morgan County Fair in my hometown, Brush, Colorado. We had the Morgan County Fair there. I used to love to go to the Morgan County Fair. You hang out there. Occasionally they have rides. You get the steer riding and everything. But, it wasn't the kind of thing that would appeal to everyone. And I would go for like a day and I'm like, okay, I've had enough of this. I don't need to be here anymore. You just go, you hang out, you go see some people, and that's about it. But this was like a really cheap version of a county fair, minus the livestock, minus anything interesting. It was so sad. I mean, we just had that robbed. It was taken from us. It was, and I'm really sad about that because we could have had a tremendous celebration of this country's 250th anniversary. Question on TikTok, why not just leave the maps for a while? Stop making changes, my opinion. Because we're about to elect a Democrat to the congressional delegation. And as I've explained before, this fight over the maps is not over the congressional maps. It's not over the congressional maps at all. It's over the legislative maps. It's over the 75 seats in the Utah House and the 29 seats in the Utah Senate. If you have to have fair maps there, it wouldn't be enough to break the supermajority. I mean, it certainly wouldn't give a Democratic majority. You would still have a Republican majority, but you would have more competitive seats. There would be more seats that would be competitive. But the problem is that means that candidates would actually have to work and campaign, and you would have to nominate candidates who could be elected to those competitive seats. This year was the first time ever that Stuart Adams had to compete for his seat. When he was first elected to the Utah House, he won in a special election, and the only people who voted on it were the delegates. And then when he ran for re-election to the Utah House, he won the nomination convention. Only voted on by the delegates, and then he was a shoo-in in November because it was an overwhelmingly Republican seat. Then he left the legislature, came back into the Senate. How did he get into the Senate? Greg Bell had left to become Lieutenant Governor to Gary Herbert, and so it was an open seat, and Stuart Adams won the special election, voted on by who? Republican delegates. And then he wins in November because it's an overwhelmingly Republican seat. This was the first time he was ever forced into a primary, first time he ever had to make his case to a wider universe of Republican voters, and what happened? He got spanked. Almost 2-1. The not Stuart Adams vote was almost 2-1 larger than the yes Stuart Adams vote. That's what happened. And so this whole map fight is not about the congressional maps. We're going to get a 5th congressional seat in 2031 anyway. Population is growing enough that we will get another congressional seat. And at that point, it's going to be almost impossible to gerrymander 5 Republican seats. It's almost a given that you will have at least 1, maybe 2 competitive seats in the state. It's going to be almost impossible to do that. That's not what this fight is about. This fight is about whether or not they have independently drawn maps for the Utah House and the Utah Senate, because you will have more competitive seats. And Republicans don't like that. Republicans in the legislature, they saw what happened to Stuart Adams. He had to fight for his seat. But on the other side, Jordan Tusher had to fight for his seat, and he won. Brady Brammer had to fight for his seat, and he won. I think, having to face more voters, convince more voters for your seat is a good thing. But that's what this fight is about. Payson on TikTok says, Bryan, congrats on your case moving forward. What races are on your radar up north? We'll have to take a look at that. We can talk about that next time. I'm running out of time, but in case you didn't see this, the 10th Circuit Court in Denver a week ago today revived my case against the Utah legislature for denying me a press pass. They said that I made a credible argument, at least at the first. We still, there's still a lot of court time ahead. There's still court arguments ahead. But I credibly alleged that the legislature locked me out, did not give me a press pass because of my viewpoint. No viewpoint discrimination. You cannot discriminate based on someone's viewpoint. And so they revived 2 of the complaints in my case, and now we're going back down to the Utah District Court. The legislature has 14 days to request a rehearing at the 10th Circuit. I don't know if they're going to do that. They have another week. If they're going to, I suspect they'll do it at the last second, and then we'll file for that. I haven't heard anything from my lawyers about that. So I don't know where that stands. But for now, the case is alive. We're still moving forward. And, and then we get to go and make our, we get to go and make our case. If they choose to continue fighting this and we go through the whole process, that means at some point we will have discovery. I would love to take a look at the emails that, went back and forth about this press pass, about the press credential policy, because when they did their sworn deposition, when they spoke up under oath, they were asked if they consulted with any lawmaker about this. If they consulted with any lawmaker, if they consulted with anybody in the legislature. And they said, oh, no. They did this all, they just did this all for themselves. They did all themselves. All the staffers did it. No lawmakers were involved. Well, I'd love to see those emails. As a journalist, I'm sure that they would be thrilled to turn over a whole trove of emails to me, a journalist, to go through. I would love to do that. And as Kiki and the Cats points out on TikTok, just keep in mind that the Utah taxpayers are footing the insane bill for the state's defense. Yes, they are using a boutique law firm out of Washington, D.C., and I got a hold of those invoices, and so far, they have spent about $423,000 on defending this lawsuit to keep one person, me, from getting a press credential and being in the room where I can ask some questions. If you read the opinion from the 10th Circuit, one of the things that the legislature said was, he can watch live streams. He can watch live streams of press conferences or recordings of press conferences, and that's just as good. And the judges all said, wait a minute, no. That's not the same thing as being in the room to answer questions. And as when Wendemus says on TikTok, $500,000 is ridiculous. Well, yeah, that's their cost. If I win, the state's going to have to pay my lawyer's costs too. I'm hoping that they will just decide that the fight is not enough, that they'll look at this ruling and say, do we really want to go through with this? And they will just settle. I wonder, I suspect that one of the reasons why I don't have a press pass, I can't say this for certain, but I did anger Stuart Adams. I did make him mad with some stories that I wrote. If you remember, I wrote a story about how he was violating state campaign finance laws, and he took to social media calling me a former member of the media, calling me unprofessional, unethical. I don't think that was actually posted to the Utah Senate official social media accounts until people complained and they moved it over to his account. But I'm pretty sure he didn't write that. I think that Senate staffers wrote that. But anyway, he was the only one who reacted that way from my reporting. And now that he's leaving, maybe they'll see their way to decide that this, it's probably not what they, it would probably not be in their best in their best interest to continue with this case when they could just give me a press pass and be done with it. Melanie's Memos asks on Instagram, can you be a contributor for a new arm and own a column? I could, but I have my own thing. You can see behind me here. It's Utah Political Watch. This is me. This is independent journalism. I'm responsible for this. I'm proud of what I do here. I mean, I'm damn proud of what I do. I work my ass off. I'm the only one responsible for that stuff. And there's no corporations funding me. There's no billionaires writing checks. I don't have a foundation behind me. It's my viewers, my readers, my listeners. That's it. People read my stuff on social media, read my stuff on the website. That's what makes this possible. And I'm damn proud of it. So yeah, I could probably become a contributor for someone, but why? Just to get a press pass? I'm right. I'm right in this fight. This fight is important enough to me that I'm right. And I'll see it through to the end. And unfortunately, you as taxpayers are going to have to pay for it. Because I'm not going to stop. And I've never been one to back down from a fight. I don't do that. I don't think they expected to get this kind of a fight. So anyway, I didn't mean to react so forcefully to that, Melanie. Apologize for that. But this is something that I truly believe in. I believe in journalism. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in what I'm doing. That's going to do it for this episode of Special Session. Thank you so much for listening. I know there's a lot of ways that you could be consuming your news and information about Utah politics, and I appreciate you spending some of it with me. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and take 30 seconds to leave a rating and a review. It really does make a difference in getting the show in front of more people who care about what's actually happening in Utah politics. And as always, this is independent, reader-funded journalism. I don't have a corporation paying the bills, I don't have a billionaire writing checks, and I don't have a foundation propping this up. It's just me and the people who read, watch, and listen who make this possible. If you want to help keep it going, head on over to utahpolitics.news, sign up for the free newsletter, become a paid subscriber, or throw a few bucks in the tip jar. Whatever works for you, it all goes straight into funding this work. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode, and until then, take care of yourselves.